Hey guys, Chief Layfield. Today we're going to be talking about fire behavior and dynamics. This is going to be the first posting to the YouTube site. Pinellas Park, we have our own YouTube channel due to the coronavirus. So let's get some training in today. And today we're going to talk about fire behavior and dynamics. The reason that we're talking about this is that over the years there has been a trend where firefighters have gotten killed because of their lack of recognition of certain rapid fire developments during a structure fire. So we're going to go over basic fire science, talk about fuel, talk about flow paths, and then we're going to talk about some rapid fire development. So let's get after it and let's get started, okay? All right, so when we're talking about basic fire science, we have to start with the states of matter, right? We're talking about solid, liquid, and gas. And the reason we have to talk about them is because that's the way our fuel is going to actually be existing. It's going to exist as either a solid, a liquid, or a gas. You can't really talk about a fire, or you can't really talk about fire science without talking about energy, because really all a fire is a release of stored or potential energy. All right. The actual flaming process is kinetic energy, which is a release of that energy. Okay. As you can see in the bottom right, potential energy is the ball at the top of the hill, and then kinetic energy is that ball rolling down the hill. All right. So when we're talking about states of matter, let's start with solid. Solid is a defined shape. All the molecules are in a rigid form. They're in a rigid structure. They're lined up so that molecules are closely held tight together. The thing is that when a solid is heated, these molecules will lose or tend to lose their rigid structure so that they're going to loosen up. Right now, I'm doing this presentation and I'm also drinking water out of a plastic water bottle. If I was to heat this plastic water bottle, you can actually start to see it melt. By heating it, what's happened is that these molecules are starting to loosen up. They're starting to move away from each other, and that's when we start talking about that type of form. We start talking about liquid. All right, liquids have shapes, right? But that shape is defined by its container. If a liquid does not have a container, it doesn't have a shape. You can see in the presentation to the left that if I was to pour, let's say, a gallon of gasoline out on the floor, all right, that gasoline is going to spread out, all right? It's not being confined. It's just going to go to the path of least resistance, right? But if I was to put that into a container, it's going to form to the shape of its container. All right, liquid is malleable, sorry. What liquid is not is that it's not compressible. So if I was to take that same gallon of gasoline, I could not put that in a less than a gallon jug, right? I can't make it fit into a pint. I can't make it fit into a 2 liter. It has to fit. It can only fit into a gallon jug, right? Which is why hydraulic power is so effective, which is why on our extrication equipment, we use hydraulic power. All right, gas. When we're talking about gas, you know that it's all about molecules, and they have absolutely no order and no discipline. Molecules tend to bounce around in space. As the molecules travel, they're going to collide against walls, they're going to collide against people. And so one of the things you need to understand about gas is that not all gas is equal. And what I mean by that is that all products have their own chemical formula, and gas happens to have, when we're talking about gases, we're talking about its molecular weight, like how much does it weigh? So the molecular weight of methane is much lighter than the molecular weight of just normal everyday air. Okay, so that means it's going to rise. Propane, which is a very common gas, combustible gas that we find in every single house, is very heavy. It's much heavier than air. So it's going to settle, okay? It's really important to know these and try to get to the bottom and figure out, especially for us hazmaters, we're kind of geeks, so we tend to always be thinking like this. But even as just basic firefighters, you need to understand the state of the matter, and you also need to understand, especially when we're talking about gases, how is it made up, and what are some basic formulas for it. All right, moving on. We're just going to talk real quickly about changes of state of matter. So when a solid turns into a liquid, so an ice cube melts to water, that's called fusion. All right, latent heat of fusion. The latent heat of solidification is when when water turns to ice, a liquid turns into a solid. Vaporization is really important, especially just know that all liquids give off vapors and all liquids have vapor pressure. And what vapor pressure is, it is the pressure the liquid is exerting against the atmosphere. All right. The more volatile and more dangerous the material is, the higher the vapor pressure it's going to have. So gasoline has a very high vapor pressure as compared to, let's say, water. Okay. And condensation is when gas turns into a liquid. So what happens is, the reason you have that is because as warm air rises, okay, it's going to absorb and as warm air rises, it's going to cool. As it cools, it loses its capacity to hold water, and so that's what happens. Water will settle. All right, getting into the basics now. So we talk about the fire triangle, and we know that the fire triangle is made up of fuel, heat, and oxygen. When you remove one of these, right, and no longer can the chemical reaction support flaming combustion. All right. The basics of the fire triangle still ring true even when we're talking about fire tactics, right? So when we're making a stretch and we're pushing down a hallway and we get to the room that's on fire and we open it up and we start shooting 150 gallons per minute right through right to the seat of the fire, what we're doing is that we're removing the heat from the fire triangle, right? We're cooling the environment, okay? If it is a propane tank that's on fire, right? And it's just flaming out of its stem, do we put it out? No, because we're still going to have a ton of fuel, have a ton of combustible fuel that's going to be out of control. What we do is if we can shut off the valve, now we're controlling the fuel. We remove the fuel from the equation, okay? And with oxygen, we've all seen the trick where you just stamp out if you light a match, put it on a little saucer, and then cover it with a coffee cup, it'll go out, and that's because all that fire is doing is burning and is eating the available oxygen within that space. All right, so that's just the basis of your fire triangle. We're getting a little bit more advanced, and we're talking about pyrolysis. All right. All that is a chemical decomposition. It's the degradation of the fuel. So as the fuel is being heated, it is degrading, it's decomposing. And when it's decomposing, it's giving off fuel vapors. Those fuel vapors are what is actually going to combust, which is actually going to flame. Just know that pyrolysis is the first step in the combustion process, and this is also known as off-gassing. So when you start hearing the term off-gassing, know scientifically what they're meaning is pyrolysis. All right. Some liquids with very high vapor pressures, such as gasoline, I'll go back to it, they are already pyrolyzing basically from the time that you don't even need to heat it. So the vapors are given off already. It's ready to light at room temperature. And that's what makes it so dangerous. All right. So when I was at Eastern Kentucky, every single fire science class that I took, the very first question was, what is the definition of fire? So I'm going to recite it to you now. It is the rapid, self-sustaining oxidation process that creates an exothermic reaction with varying degrees and intensity in light. So what that means is I'm looking at that match right now. All right, that match there is a fire, there is flaming combustion, it is oxidizing, and it's an exothermic reaction. Now, if I was to take a blowtorch, or if I was to take a car fire and put it right up to it, is that a different type of fire? Is it much more intense? Is it a little bit brighter? I would say so. So you can have varying degrees. All right, that's still a fire, but it could just have varying degrees of it. All right, so let's talk about fire growth here. So fire growth, incipient stage, developing stage, fully developed, flashover, and decay. All right, when we're talking about the incipient stage, we are talking about the very beginning of the actual flaming combustion. All right, fuel has already been heated. All right, it was already started to off gas. All right, and we were able for the fuel, heat, and oxygen were all able to come together to support the chemical reaction, and now we have a self-sustaining oxidative process, which is known as fire. Okay, that is the incipient stage. The difference between the incipient stage and the developing stage is that in the incipient stage, you can extinguish that with a handheld portable fire extinguisher. It's not going to take much. All right, once we get past that, we get into the developing stage. This is where we tend to meet fire in the fire department, on the fire ground. All right, we usually tend to see this in the developing stage. It is free burning. All right, there's plenty of fuel, and the only limiting factor for a developing stage is going to be its oxygen supply. All right. There are chances, and we're starting to see it more and more. I've seen it. I saw it a lot as a company officer, where it seemed like it wasn't that bad, and when we open up the door, we start making a push, and then next thing you know, we start seeing some flaming combustion off in the distance. Well, what happens is that we start beginning to vent limited fires, which we'll get into later. But the developing stage of a fire is just that. It is starting to move beyond the origin, and the object of origin is fire spread is starting to take place. When we start talking about fully developed versus flashover, understand that fully developed is a measurement of energy and time, where flashover is an event. All right, so a fully developed fire, that fire is consuming all of the fuel. All of the fuel is giving off all the energy that is going to, and it's going to sustain for a while until it runs out of fuel. A flashover is a instantaneous event where in a compartment all the combustible materials are heated to their flash point or their combustion point. They all start off-gassing, and then when that right ideal mixture hits, you have instantaneous combustion, and you have it's just a rapid, deadly fire event. And the only way a firefighter can survive a flashover is if he is about 3 to 5 feet from the threshold of a door. That's it. Okay, so the difference between a flashover and fully developed stage is that flashover is an event. All right. When we start getting into the decay phase, the fire is starting to lose its energy. The temperatures are starting to come down. It's still hot. Don't get me wrong, but it's definitely starting to lose its energy. And the reason for that is because all the fuel has already been consumed. All right, transfers of heat. All right, conduction, convection, and radiation. I know this seems very basic, but it's still very important. When we're talking about conduction of heat, we're talking about the movement of heat or the transfer of heat through a solid medium, such as like a metal pipe. If you're holding a metal spatula up against the stove, that's a gas burning stove, and it starts heating the actual flat spatula. In a minute or two, your hand's going to start burning, because the heat is conducting through that metal solid medium, right, and into your hand. Where Mary Beth is from, in Northeast Pennsylvania, you can have a fire on the first floor, and the way that they heat their radiators through oil, right? So if fire starts impinging on some of those metal pipes that run through the entire length of the house, it can get so hot that now it's going to start spreading fire through that, through the conduction of the heat through the metal pipe. It's going to start catching other spots of the house on fire. So having a fire, going to a structure fire where there's multiple fire points, you should think that something either conducted or is balloon frame construction. Convection is just the movement or the transfer of heat through a fluid medium, which could either be air or water or liquid. Okay. this is how flow path, like when we start talking about flow paths and turbulent flows and laminar flows, the movement of air and the movement of heat through air is convection, all right? And radiation is just that is the transfer of heat through electromagnetic waves. So if I have a chair that's on fire, it catches the other chair on fire next to it, is because it radiated heat towards it. Those electromagnetic waves started to break and decompose the other chair down. So it started to off gas, it started to heat it up, and then that how flaming combustion took place, and that's how fire spread. When we start talking about fuels and we start talking about heat release rates, remember that heat release rates are just a measurement of energy that a fuel releases over a certain amount of time. So when we look at this, the cotton mattress on the bottom right versus a sofa, we know that a cotton mattress at best is going to be 350 kilojoules over a second. The sofa is going to have 3,200 per second. So the heat release rate is so much faster from that sofa because of the material that it's gonna raise the temperature in the space much more faster. So in caveman terms, the sofa burns faster than the cotton mattress. All right. Another example, the wood pallet versus a sofa. So how is heat release rate and temperature related? Well, they're not directly related, but they are related. Heat release rates is just a measurement of how fast something's going to burn and give off its energy over a period of time. So higher the heat release rates means it's going to burn faster. It's going to give off energy much quicker than it would, let's say, of a fire 30 years ago. It doesn't mean that we can't get up to that type of temperature, but it just means that we get to that temperature quicker. The heat release rates have been known to cause to a lot of vent limited fires because they burn so quickly that they consume all the available oxygen. So we're left with a really hot space, a lot of fuel, a lot of heat. We just don't have enough oxygen. And usually when we get there, we force the front door, we open it up, we let all that smoke kind of dilute because there's an area of high pressure, and then outside is low pressure. So, and then on the bottom we have that bi-directional flows. The fire is going to pull in the cool, fresh air from the outside. It's going to kind of dilute it, and now we're going to have a ripe mixture, and then we're going to have flaming combustion again. Okay. One way to look at heat release rates versus temperature is if I'm driving a car 100 miles an hour, and I got to get to my destination is 100 miles away. Means I'm going to get there in an hour, right? If my car is driving 50 miles an hour, I'm going to get there in 2 hours. I'm still going to get to my destination. I'm just going to get there quicker driving 100 miles an hour, all right? One of the big takeaways from this is that modern furnaces get the flashover much faster than the older ones. So we're going to require a lot more gallons per minute, especially from our hose lines. And we're going to get into flammability limits here for all my hazmat guys. You guys are very familiar with lower explosive and upper explosive limits. Fuel, when we're talking about that, we're talking about a fuel to air mixtures. Okay, so a lower explosive limit may mean that we have a lot of oxygen. We just don't have enough fuel, right? We just don't have enough to burn. But the upper explosive limit, the UEL, or if we're talking about in structure fires, a vent limited condition, which means that we have way too much fuel. We either have not enough space in the compartment, and we had too much fuel in that certain compartment that once the flaming combustion started, it started releasing all that energy, started releasing all that other vapors, it started displacing oxygen, started consuming oxygen, and next thing you know it, now all flaming combustion stops because we just don't have enough oxygen. So that's what happens in an event limited situation. What happens is that when the fire department gets there, we're going to dilute that mixture, and it's going to find its ideal mixture, and we'll get flaming combustion again. We're going to look at legacy and then modern fuels, and just notice the rapid fire growth. Notice on the right, which is your modern fuels, is that you're going to have you're going to notice how quickly that these temperatures are brought to bear versus the legacy, and that's because of the fuels. Polyurethane foams, plastics, and hydrocarbons, they have such high heat release rates that they just release all that energy just so much quicker. Hopefully I don't have an ad. Okay, look to the right. That's your synthetic room, your plastics. Your natural room's on the left.
Argo's got a good one. Burns down the Taco Bell. They already convinced him. They already convinced him. Large fire.
So you notice on the natural room, right? It's burning, it's going, but it's really not. It's not spreading like it did on the synthetic room. All right, we're only 3 minutes in. It takes us about 4 minutes to get there, and that's after someone actually found the fire. There you go. So, flashed over at 340. All right. All right, so ventilation controlled atmosphere, there's too much fuel, not enough oxygen, all right? It's a rich atmosphere. We've already been over this. The fire burns so quickly that it consumes all the available oxygen in the space, but heat and fuel remain. It just needs an oxygen source, and we as firefighters are the ones who tend to give it to them. Right here. So here's your ignition. Fire starting to burn. This right here is probably the incipient stage. You're starting to get to the developing stage. Okay, and right here is we're probably eating up all the oxygen. We start to kind of go into our decay phase. All right, once we make entry through the door, we dilute the atmosphere. We make it so that it's an ideal mixture, and guess what? Flaming combustion starts back, and then we have to extinguish the fire. So, if you look at vent controls, we dilute the mixture by opening a door or window. Remember, the area of high pressure is going to move out, such as hot fire gases, and low pressure is going to move in, such as your oxygen. And we already have enough heat and fuel. All that's missing is oxygen. Here's another one. Here's another video of a vent controlled fire. I think it's only about 20 seconds. It's pretty neat. It just it literally shows how it starts to decay already. It only takes about 20 seconds.
This ventilation-limited fire consumes all of the oxygen needed for combustion. Once the fire consumes the oxygen, there isn't any left to feed the fire.
All right. Now, if you were to break a window of that room, you'd probably bring that room to flashover pretty quickly because of modern fuels. But right now, if you're able to contain the fire to just that room, what's going to happen is that you're going to have smoke that's going to get outside of that room. It's going to fill the house with smoke. In fact, me and Murphy, that was Murphy's very first fire, was right off of 82nd Avenue. It was just a single-story residential house, and right in the front of the house was a bedroom, and it had just a little window shaker, and we saw smoke coming out of that room. So we went through the front door, and it really wasn't that much smoke. We went right into the we were able to make a quick stretch to the area that was on fire, or the room that was on fire, the fire room. And once we opened up the door, there was a lot of smoke, and then within seconds, next thing you know, that bed just lit off again. And Patrick did a great job, put the fire out, and it was an easy job, but it really drove home what a vent controlled situation looks like. So remember, whether it's a natural Class A materials or hydrocarbons or anything else, remember that all fire gases are toxic. All right, smoke is just a byproduct of incomplete combustion, and as fuels release their atoms and their other molecules, they're going to bind with other ones that can make some very deadly and poisonous gases. When we're talking about survivability, there's three key elements: elevation in the space, which is we're talking about victims; time exposed, how long have they been exposed to the lethal dose, or how long have they been exposed to the toxic environment, and obviously their proximity to the fire, which is just thermal exposure. UL did a study where they measured the toxic gases exposures for victims, and they put one victim they measured was right outside the fire room, and the other victim was in a bed 3 feet high, 2 doors down from the fire, and the victim who was 2 doors down on the bed received the greatest dose of toxic gases. So when we find these people, when we find our victims, remember, if you find them on a bed, you need to get them down to the floor. I know it may be easier, but you got to get them down to the floor, drag them to a window, close the door behind you, open up the window, because you're going to have to dilute that area and try to get as much fresh air. Because if they're still breathing, the less time that they have to breathe those toxic gases, the better that it is for them. All right. And remember, if you find someone in a bedroom, it doesn't mean you have to take them out the way you came in. Just take them out the window if you can. All right. All right, so let's look at the chemical formula of wood. All right, it has 6 carbon atoms, has 10 hydrogen atoms, has 5 oxygen atoms. So when you start heating a piece of wood, all right, it's going to start giving off these molecules, right? It's decomposing, it's pyrolyzing, it's off-gassing. So let's say that 2 of those hydrogen atoms combine with 1 oxygen atom. Guess what? That makes H2O, right? So water vapor is present in every single fire. If 1 carbon combines with 1 oxygen, that creates carbon monoxide. If just 1 hydrogen combines with 1 carbon and 1 nitrogen, you have hydrogen cyanide. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is that even though wood, which is a Class A material, it's a natural combustible. All right, it's not a hydrocarbon. You're not going to have the really dark black smoke. Okay, but what you will still have is very toxic gases, and it really doesn't matter what's burning. You need to be wearing your SCBA, and you need to really protect your respiratory tract, because this is stuff that can really hurt you. And over the long run, the longer you're exposed to it, the unforeseen medical problems you can have down the road. Remember, carbon that doesn't associate with any other molecules, or just free suspended carbon, is what we call soot. All right. So let's talk about just some fire gas principles, and we're going to get into flow paths and other stuff. Remember, when a fire is combusting, when that oxidation process and free burning process is taking place, it's creating pressure, it is increasing temperature, and it's decreasing volume at the same time. Okay, and I'll get into that shortly. So when we're talking about pressure, I'm talking about when a fire is combusting. Remember, heat is going to cause all the molecules in a room to start moving rapidly. And when you increase it rapidly, when the molecules increase rapidly, increases the rate of collisions that they're going to have with each other, with the walls, with you. All right. when you confine those molecules to a space, especially a smaller space, you're going to increase the pressure. So if I take my SCBA bottle, if I try to fill it, right, with all of those air molecules, it's going to heat up. What's causing it to heat up is that all those air molecules, I'm basically compressing them, they're hitting against the wall. 4,500 pounds of pressure is nothing in a, if you were just outside, right? If I took all that air and just let it off outside, it's no big deal. But if I try to compress it in a tiny SCBA bottle, it's a lot of pressure, right? So, just so you know, when a fire is combusting, the heat from that fire is going to cause a rise in pressure. Remember, gas is always going to move from an area of high pressure to low pressure and an area of high temperature to a low temperature. These characteristics are going to ring true forever. All right, this is just basic physics, and this is what causes fire spread. And this is when we start talking about flow paths. This is what we're talking about: high pressure, high to low, and high pressure to low pressure, and high temps to low temps. So gas flows because of pressure. Remember, laminar flow is usually, this is what we're talking about. If we're using a Bunsen burner or a gas burning stove, that is laminar flow. All right, a very easy example is just take a normal everyday AC unit. You have a blower somewhere up top, whether it be outside or in your attic. All right, that is the high pressure area. It is just pushing air through those air vents, and it's going in a defined direction, and then going outside the vents. Not very common for structure fires, but it is something that we have to talk about. Turbulent flows is what we tend to see, or what we most likely are going to see on a structure fire. It's the same as laminar flow. It's going to have a definite direction, but you're going to have a lot of changes in velocity because it's going to hit walls. It's going to have to. It's going to make turns. It's going to have to go around corners. It's going to hit light fixtures. It's going to hit furniture. So it flows over a bunch of rough surfaces. It's kind of like, you could take a regular river, but if you start adding rocks and other particles and other stuff that impede the flow, guess what you have? You have a whitewater rapids, right? So what this does, it results in more surface area being covered, which means there's more area, more of the surfaces of the structure are going to be heated by doing this, because they're going to be exposed. All right, so now let's talk about volume. Right now, the volume and the pressure inside both of these two buildings is exactly the same. It's one atmosphere, right? At sea level. At sea level. All right. So if I was to take one couch, or I'll just take a love seat. If I take a love seat and the rate of burning and the development of the fire is exactly the same, and I put them in this building versus this building, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think the pressure is going to increase more here, or is it going to increase in here? I'm hoping you guys are going to say it's going to increase more in here, in this little tiny Doug Sliger tiny home right here. Okay, why is that? It's because you have less volume, you have less surface area for that thing to heat. All right, and when we're talking about volume, we're talking about the size of the compartment. All right, if you decrease the volume, you increase the pressure. So you can take the exact same fire, put it in here and put it in here. I have decreased the volume, so therefore the pressure inside this building is going to be more. So the smoke conditions coming out of this house, this little tiny home, is going to be black. It's going to be really turbulent because it's going to be under high pressure. All right. So if I took a couch here and put it in this building, or let's take the Station 34 barn. If I took a Station 34 barn, I emptied it out, took whatever, and I lit off a couch, are you going to see some smoke conditions? Yeah, you can see some smoke conditions coming out of it. It may take a while. If I take that same couch and I put it in one of the apartments in Freedom Village, am I going to have a significant issue with fire spread? Yeah, probably, because one, everything is really, really small in there. You're probably going to bring that apartment to Flashover because of the heat release rates of a sofa. And if the door is left open, you're definitely going to have it flash, and you're going to have rapid fire spread into the hallway. Okay. One way to control and increase your volume of a space and decrease the pressure is ventilation. So think of it that way. The reason fire departments top vent or do vertical ventilation is because you're trying to remove the heat. When you remove the heat, you reduce the pressure. Okay? An increase in temperature is an increase in pressure. So if I double the temperature, I double the pressure. And when I do that, it increases the speed of the molecules that move in the compartment. So let's put it all together, okay? If I reduce the temperature, I reduce the volume of gas. All right. The reason for that is because now I'm stopping the actual burning process. I'm stopping the production of all these gases being produced. When I increase the volume, I can reduce the pressure, right? So if I vent a house, I'm going to relieve the pressure that's being exerted in that house, because it's all going to go what? It's all going to go up out of my vertical opening. If I reduce the temperature, I reduce the pressure, because that makes sense, because I cool it, and now the molecules are going to start slowing down, and they're not going to be moving around as much inside that space. All right, so let's talk about flow paths. All right, flow paths is basically the travel of fire gases, smoke, heat, actual fire from areas of high pressure to an area of low pressure. Okay, somewhere inside this house, a fire is combusting, right? So we actually have actual flame combustion. It's drawing in oxygen right here, the inlet. Okay. It's creating an area of high pressure and is pushing it out. Okay, and right here in the middle we have the neutral plane. This is what we call bidirectional flow. Okay, that's why it's really important to maintain door control and coordinated ventilation, because when we start talking about unidirectional flows, you can really, if you're in between the inlet and the exit, it is not the place to be. So in that very first picture you saw, that's bidirectional flow. You have one vent point. It's basically an opening of the front door. All right. So as a fire is creating higher pressures inside the building, it's also raising the temperature inside, which causes all the hot gases to rise. As the pressure is being pushed to the as the smoking gases are being pushed to the areas of lower pressure, which is outside the front door, right? Because that's normal atmospheric pressure. Cool air is being pulled in, right? Because the fire wants to eat. So you almost have that bidirectional flow. You have hot air going out, cool air going in, and right in the middle is your neutral plane. Okay, cool air goes in, hot air goes out, and the gases will exit the opening high. That's why when you force the front door, get low, man. You don't need to expose yourself to that type of heat. All right. And you know, it's a lot of times you'll find if this is the front door, you force this front door. I'm a big fan of forcing the front door, leave it open for a little bit. All right, get low, kind of you're burping the building, right? You're relieving the building of pressure. You're gonna let the smoke rise. Okay, that way you can look for three things. And thank you, Nolan Sloan. He's the one who actually coined this term. You're looking for fire, layout, and for victims. All right, so that's three things you need to look at. Whenever I taught forcible entry to my old crew, I always teach, force the door, get low, burp the building, and then start looking for victims. He's one was like, well, you should look for fire and you should look for layout too, right? And I was like, yeah, that's absolutely right. So good on you, Nolan. So let's start talking about unidirectional flow. That is where the inlet and the exit are remote from each other. So I may have an inlet on the first floor, and then let's say someone just starts, someone's like, I'm just going to vent. I'm just going to take that window. What you do is you call it a flow path. You have an area, especially if it's wind driven. But remember, hot gases are going to want to rise, right? So it's going to want to go up high, and then it's going to also want to find an area of inexhaustible oxygen. So being anywhere caught in between the inlet and the exit is not a good place to be. And the reason it's a unidirectional flow is because it's all going in the same direction. Nothing is coming here and then coming back. So it's all unidirectional flow. When we start talking about wind-driven fires and blowtorch conditions, this is what we're talking about. The inlet is under pressure and it can create a blowtorch effect. Do not get caught between here and there, okay? All right, we're going to take a quick video of a couple wind-driven fires, and then the FDNY had like a little 3-minute clip, and yeah. So this looks to be the National Institute of Science and Technology, NIST, and looks like they were doing a wind-driven experiment. You do not want to be in this room. So this is obviously the exit, and somehow or another on the opposite side, whether it be down the hallway or across if this is or if there's window on the other side, is the inlet, and it seems to be under pressure because it's actually pushing.
So, what is a wind-impacted fire? These fires are predominantly due to wind forcing fire back into the building through windows that have either self-vented, been left open by the occupants, or were vented prematurely by firefighters. It's a deadly fire which, if the apartment door is left open, or it's opened by us and not controlled, causes blowtorch conditions in the apartment and the public hall without warning. Wind striking the face of the building is funneled through an open window, which greatly increases the amount of oxygen that comes into contact with the fuel. This results in a dramatic increase in the heat release from the burning fuel. The wind-impacted flames now create a blowtorching fire. It blasts out of the apartment door and into the public hallway. This open apartment door allows for the movement of heat and smoke from the high-pressure fire area to the low-pressure area of the public hallway. The term for this movement of superheated smoke and fire gases is flow path.
When I was at the door to the fire department, with the door closed and my hands holding the door, keeping the door from closing all the way, it just created a small little opening for the heat and the wind to come through. And it was howling through that opening. The heat was disorienting, and my hands had burned through my gloves.
During high-rise multiple dwelling operations, our actions or inactions can create the conditions for this airflow or the flow path. When we stretch a line from the attack stairway, the stairway door becomes blocked open, and now the staircase itself becomes a chimney. That's a flow path. This situation is even worse if the bulkhead door at the top of the attack stairway is open. Remember, any venting of attack stairway bulkhead doors must be done with permission of the incident commander. The opening of a door on the opposite side of the hallway from the fire department, whether by us or an occupant, will also create another flow path. And that's going to draw the fire into the public hallway and could turn this into a blowtorching fire. If you feel you have to force an apartment door in the public hallway to use as an area of refuge, you have to force a door on the same side of the hallway as the fire department. If you don't, you're going to create a flow path. If you're dealing with an open door scenario, and you don't know which side of the hallway the open fire department door is on, you shouldn't be forcing any doors as an area of refuge. Because if you force the wrong door, which is a door on the opposite side of the hallway from the open fire department door, you're going to create a flow path and you're going to draw the fire and heat to you. When wind, window failure, and an open apartment door come together, they're going to turn a seemingly routine fire into a wind-impacted fire. This heat and fire will extend from the apartment into the public hallway faster than members can evacuate or exit the public hall. This blowtorching, wind-impacted fire is producing superheated gases with temperatures that are in excess of 1,500 to 2,000 degrees. The heat levels alone in the hallway are enough to fatally injure firefighters. So, what is a wind impact?
All right. I'm sure everyone really liked that, appreciated the accent. So, moving on. All right. So let's talk about rapid fire developments. And when I'm talking about rapid fire developments, I'm talking about flashover and backdrafts. Okay, these are two things that happen instantaneously, and they both can be very deadly. So, one, for a flashover to happen, you have to have a non-exhaustible oxygen supply. So usually you have to have a failure of a window, you have to have some sort of ventilation opening, or the front door has to be complete left wide open. That's why door control is actually very important. All right. What's caused it is radiant heat and turbulent fire gases were moving throughout the adjacent structures, and they were heating all the adjacent fuels. They started the process of decomposition, which was given off of combustible vapors. It started off-gassing, which then causes those to increase their temperature, which increases gas volumes, increases the pressure, right? Once it gets its oxygen supply, it gets what it needs, it gets the right mixture, then you have an instantaneous combustion of all of the adjacent fuels in a compartment. It can reach temperatures of over 1,000 degrees. This is extremely dangerous, and it is non-survivable. I think the only way to survive a flashover is to be within like 3 feet of the threshold, because you don't have any time. You're everything that's on you is going to fail at that point. Because remember, our face piece is only good up until about 360 degrees, and then it starts to fail. You're going to have temperatures not at the ceiling 1,000 degrees, but like at your head at 1,000 degrees. So, signs and symptoms of an impending flashover is: one, you're doing a search or you're doing a fire attack and you notice a rapid increase in temperature. Okay, what's happening around you is that all of the fuels around you, whether it be solid structures or the fuel that's in a gas state, such as smoke and fire gases, are increasing in temperature and they're about to light off. If you have a lowering neutral plane, which means that you're going to have smoke banked down to the floor, if you start seeing flame fingers through the smoke, and what that is that you have enough heat and you have enough, and then these little pockets of oxygen are happening, then you have that flaming really quick. So if you're seeing that, that is an issue, and you need to start cooling the atmosphere. And if you get on scene and you start seeing turbulent black smoke pouring out of each window and out of the front door, and it's banked down to the floor, one, you have to make some sort of decision, of whether or not is there anyone in there survivable. And if I am going in there, I need to cool the atmosphere and I need to change the atmosphere before I go in there, because if I don't, I'm not doing any good for me, and I'm sure not doing any good for the unprotected victims that are in there. And remember, if you start seeing off-gassing that's already at the floor, you need to cool the atmosphere immediately. All right, we're going to take one quick video. Okay, it's only about a minute long. And you can see, you see a fire department. We're not picking on them. I don't know who they are. But all I see is I see a lot of turbulent smoke. Okay, which means I see a lot of angry smoke. I see a lot of smoke that's under pressure. So I know that there is a significant fire within the compartment. And then I see a lot of uncoordinated ventilation. All right, sometimes the difference between a flashover and just really a heavy fire involvement and just a lot of smoke is the fact that a lack of ventilation. All right, so uncoordinated ventilation, yes, they are relieving the pressure, but they're also feeding the fire. Okay, so let's take a look. You can hear the window break. See the guy over there with the hook? Starting to get real angry here. Starting to light off. It's instantaneous.
Everybody out! Everybody
Hear the panic. All right. All right, so let's talk about Backdraft. And yes, this is me. They're very rare. They're extremely dangerous. The cause of them is, one is high pressure, two, oxygen deficiency, and three is going to be really very high heat. All right, so you have the proper heat and you have the proper fuel, and just because it's, and we're talking about fuel in the gaseous state and actual physical fuel, what we don't have is oxygen. All right, and let's get into it. So usually this happens with fuels that have very high heat release rates because they burn so quickly, they eat up all the oxygen in the space. So it causes the fuel to air mixture to be too rich. What happens with that is that it burns very quickly and it creates an area of very, very high pressure. So when you get on scene, if you're trying to recognize the signs and symptoms, is one, you're seeing if gas is actually being released, if smoke is starting to be released, it's starting to puff. What's happened is the gas gets released and then it sucks air back in because it creates an area of low pressure, which causes an inrush of air. All right, so it's really, the building is going to look like it's breathing and the smoke's going to look like it's puffing. So why can it be so deadly? Well, one, once you introduce and dilute the a atmosphere that is too rich to burn, and it has all the components that are ripe for a fire, such as heat and fuel package, all it needs is for you to change that atmosphere and you're going to have instantaneous combustion. All right, and remember, we've already been talking about fire gas principles. When you have high pressure, it's going to seek low pressure. And where is that low pressure? It's usually outside at that opening where you're going to be standing. All right, so that's why it's so dangerous, and that's why it can be so violent. So, I screwed it up, sorry.
Now to Erica and the new
Sorry about
developments
that.
in tragedy.
Do it one more time. So what happens in this video is that you have a attic fire. Okay, it seems to be an attic that's in the a fire that's in the attic. Crews are starting to go in. Okay, they open up the door. What I'm going to assume is that they get halfway in, they start exposing the fire that's over their head, and you can see that, boom. What happens is that they allowed oxygen to enter the attic. When they did that, they allowed the mixture of fuel and air to hit its ideal mixture, and then all of a sudden it just relieved all that pressure out the opening. So that's what happened here. You can see all the insulation. This is just a quick video of you can just really see the violence of a backdraft. It almost blows the roof off of this house. See it bulge right there? They're going to slow it down in slow motion. And last one. This one I'm sure you guys have all seen. All right, this one was in New York not too long ago, before coronavirus. Truck crews going up to do truck work. They're going to go up and they're going to open up the roof. There seems to be a significant amount of fire that's actually in there, and I think when they open up the roof, they dilute the mixture. And boom. The guy who's filming is actually pretty funny.
Major explosion.
The reason I think that the
Members are
vent
down.
up the
Oh my
top did it,
God.
because if you go up there right here, you can see that it's ripping now.
Everybody's being back.
All right, so how do we protect ourselves? One, with a flashover, cool the environment. Do not get caught in a flashover with the nozzle in your hand. That is unforgivable. All right. One, you have to have the proper GPM. So make sure that you're getting 150 gallons coming out of an 1 3/4. You're getting 300, 260 to 300 coming out of a 2.5. All right. And that also means that depending on the size of the fire, you got to pull the right size hose. All right. When we're talking about backdraft, one, you have to be able to recognize the conditions. All right, you have to control the ventilation, so don't just go opening up the doors and breaking all the windows. Remember, open up doors slowly. The way to beat a flashover, to beat a backdraft, is that you have to reduce the pressure inside the building slowly, not rapidly. Okay, and that should take care of that. Listen, I want to thank you guys for all your hard work that you guys have been doing over the last few weeks. I really appreciated it. If you guys have any questions, feel free to call me. Feel free to email me. Do whatever you can stop by my office. I'll come and have lunch with you guys if you want. But I really appreciate you guys taking the time, and have a good day.